This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel
Joel?
with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
That's me, Joel Godet. Glad to have you along with us. Thanks as always for clicking subscribe or download. Joining us here again on a Friday morning for some PXPcast. It is the podcast about play-by-play guys for play-by-play guys, hosted by a play-by-play guy. If you'd like to get in touch with the podcast, feel free to do so. We are on Twitter at PXPcast. I am at Twitter at Joel Godet, JoelGodett, or you can hit me up via email as well. That is JGODETT at bsu.edu, BSU for Ball State University.edu. If you did not catch our conversation last week with Tony Caridi and you'd like to go back through and dive into that really good kind of pre-season football primer for you, if you're getting ready for football season and you haven't had the chance to go back and listen to last week's chat with West Virginia's Tony Caridi, really does a good job to kind of help get you in the mindset of football season and preparation for football season, and how to get yourself on the right page and kind of tuned up heading into the first sport of the fall. We will go back to baseball, though, on today's episode of the podcast, and join Dave Jageler, who is with Charlie Slows, one of the voices of the Washington Nationals on the radio. He's been there almost the entire existence of the team. Team moved to Washington in 2005, and Dave Jageler came on board in 2006. And we start off the podcast talking about Dave's path, and we do that with a lot of people on the pod. And a lot of people have very unique paths, as does Dave. His is interesting, though, from a baseball standpoint, and he talks about this right off the bat. You know, Dave didn't think he was going to be a Major League Baseball guy. He thought, if anything, he would be going to the NBA. Did not do baseball consistently, professionally, until 2005. He was with the Pawtucket Red Sox, who, of course, have a phenomenal lineage, in 2005, and then he was with the Nationals in 2006, and he's never looked back. But he's done a ton of different things, from West Virginia to Charlotte to Boston, of course, to Pawtucket, and now to Washington. It did include some baseball with the Charlotte Knights. It certainly included some talk show work and some update work, a lot of different things. I mean, some news work in West Virginia. Speaking of Tony Caridi from last week's episode, a lot of twists and turns for Dave Jageler that eventually wound him up as the voice of the Pawtucket Red Sox and the Washington Nationals. We'll talk about that entire path for him, how talk show work influences his work now as a play-by-play guy. We'll talk about baseball preparation, how he weaves storytelling. We will touch on the Bob Carpenter scorebook as a fellow Washington Nationals broadcaster. We will touch on Syracuse as well. Dave is another Syracuse guy, another WAER guy. I believe 1993, Dave Jageler graduated from Syracuse. So like we did with Tony Caridi last week, we'll touch on some college broadcasting stories and some of the other names that you might be familiar with that were students at Syracuse and at WAER at the same time as Dave Jageler. Let's dive right in, though, and we'll start with the beginning of his career. The twists and turns, what led him to become one of the voices of the Washington Nationals. It was a long journey that from the outset, I don't think Dave would tell you that it went how he thought it would go, or if he kind of thought where it was going to go. It's one of those things that we very much have learned on this podcast. There is no one set way. This was Dave Jageler's way here on Play-by-Playcast.
Everybody's path is different, and very rarely is the path straight. And I mean, the thing about my path is I didn't ultimately know where I wanted the path to go. I mean, I think I knew I wanted to do some sort of play-by-play on the professional level or the college level or, you know, ESPN network kind of level. Maybe not necessarily knowing how to get there, but when you're sitting there in college, and you're getting out of college, the key to me was, well, just try to get that first job and then see where it takes you. So fortunately, when I was at Syracuse, my senior year, the football team was very good, and the Orange ended up going to the Fiesta Bowl out in Tempe. And a gentleman named Tony Caridi was doing the network radio feed. It might have been for Mutual or Westwood One. He was doing the network feed for that game. And I knew he was a Syracuse guy, and he worked in Morgantown, West Virginia. So I kind of knew who he was, introduced myself to him, and made a connection there. So that was, midway through my senior year. So the senior year, second semester comes and goes, and lo and behold, the place in Morgantown, West Virginia, WAJR, had kind of been a pipeline from Syracuse or from WAER right there. There have been a couple of guys previously who had gone there. So, I kept in touch with Tony, and they had a job open. And unfortunately for me, it was in news. So I took a job initially in Morgantown, not long after graduation, in news, which was really an ill-equipped fit for me, because I don't much like the news or covering the news. I wanted to do sports, but it was a job, and there was a sports component to it, in that they did high school play-by-play. They were the flagship. The West Virginia network was flagship for Mountaineer football and basketball, WVU. So there was a sports component to it. It wasn't just totally news, but the bulk of my job was news, and it was covering city council meetings in Morgantown, West Virginia, which is not exactly a compelling theater. So that kind of did a little of everything, and they were mandatory 6-day work weeks, long hours, low pay, but a real good proving ground. I mean, they had a very, very good operation there. So I was there. It totaled 9 months, but again, the connection I made at the Fiesta Bowl when I was still in school allowed me to get that first job. One of the other things that they did out of that studio was they were the distributor for the Virginia Tech Hokie Network, football and basketball. And Bill Roth, another Syracuse guy, was the play-by-play guy for Virginia Tech at that time. And so I ended up doing the studio pre- and post-game scoreboard updates for their basketball games. And a connection with Bill, he was friends with a guy named Jim Brinson, who was the program director of a startup sports radio station in Charlotte. And they were looking for people. So Bill basically told Jim, "You've got to hire Dave." Jim hired Dave, and there I was. And then all of a sudden, after 9 months in Morgantown, I was down in Charlotte at basically a startup sports radio station. And the first week that I was in Charlotte, the Final Four was there. That was 1994, and the men's basketball Final Four was there the first week that I worked down there. So Charlotte was a great opportunity for me, again, to do a lot of things. But, first of all, I was knee-deep in sports. I was doing sports only. It was sports updates primarily. The first year there, I hooked up with Davidson College, which now everybody knows as Steph Curry's alma mater. But back then, there was a small Southern Conference basketball school. I got to do the play-by-play for those games for 1 year. The following year, I switched over to North Carolina Charlotte, which was a little bit more high-profile program. And I ended up doing 7 years there, and I think they were in the NCAA tournament 5 out of those 7 years. And, that was a very good experience. The Charlotte Knights AAA team was there. So like 94, 95, I was the number 2 guy doing home games because the games were on our station. The games left our station, so I didn't do any baseball for a long time. But again, doing sports updates and ultimately moving into talk show work, I think that ability to be conversational really served me well and was a good training ground for baseball play-by-play, even though I wasn't doing baseball. So basically from like 95 to 2001, I didn't do any baseball at all. I thought I wanted to be an NBA announcer. And in 2001, the lead play-by-play guy for the Charlotte Knights, I think his dad was sick and he needed someone to fill in. And so I did a few games, and it really sharpened my resume because I hadn't done baseball in about 6 years. So I had some fresh material and probably ended up doing 6 or 7 games. Well, in 2001, the program director at the station in Charlotte left to join a startup sports station in Boston. and they got the rights to the Celtics. So they offered me the job there, with the carrot being I would be the fill-in play-by-play guy for the Celtics. So again, my focus then was I want to be an NBA play-by-play guy. Well, the best way to do that is to get an NBA tape. So it was only a handful of games a year, but it was something. 2 or 3 NBA games a year on the resume, I thought would be a good entree into being a full-time guy in the league. So again, went up to Boston, did talk show work, sports updates, and the occasional fill-in play-by-play. That was 2001 through 2005. The station started to really have problems financially, and it was pretty apparent the station was going to go under. But fortunately, the Pawtucket Red Sox had an opening, and I had made some connections there with folks in the front office just being up in New England. And because I had those games in Charlotte in 2001, I had a fairly recent sample of play-by-play. And 2005 was hired to be the lead announcer of the Pawtucket Red Sox. So, I mean, baseball really came out of nowhere. It was almost by necessity because I knew the station I was at was going to be going under and I needed a job. And it was a chance to finally, at that stage of my life, do full-time play-by-play. And that's how I got into baseball. And amazingly, 1 year later, I was with the Nationals. I mean, some guys are working in slating in AAA for 10, 15, 20 years, and they're outstanding announcers. I was fortunate to kind of have the player route. You spend 1 year in AAA, and you hope you get the call-up, and I did.
Was it, and I know you said at the beginning that you didn't exactly know kind of where you wanted it to take you from the outset, but as that's all happening and as your life is unfolding, had you made a determination in your mind to say, I want to go the play-by-play route, or I'm enjoying the talk show route, I want to go that way, and kind of how does that all unfold in your mind? Because I'm sure in 1997, you're trying to kind of plot out, okay, like, where's this going to take me? And then in 2001, you're doing the same thing. And where did you kind of see that river carrying you as it was going, and kind of where that light would be at the end of the tunnel?
Well, that's an interesting question. And as I look back on it, you wish you had the wisdom when you were younger that you have when you're older. I mean, I was singular-minded about wanting to do play-by-play. I did not enjoy talk show work particularly. I mean, it was fun in a way, but to me, the fun, because I was doing play-by-play, just not on a full-time basis. I mean, I was doing the 30 college games when I was in Charlotte, and when I was in Boston, I was doing 3 or 4 NBA games. So I had a taste of it, and it's like I wanted more of it, because to me it was far more exciting to be at the game, describing the game, calling the game, than talking about the game the next day, or debating about the game, or why coach or manager should have done this, that, or the other. So, I mean, I play-by-play is what I knew I was good at and what I wanted to do. And when you're sitting there and you're working in the talk shows, and it's not really what you want to do, you don't know where the light at the tunnel is, because there's no guarantee that someone's going to like your work, or that the pieces are going to fall in place for you to get that job. So I probably didn't enjoy the journey to where I ended up as much, because I so desperately wanted to get there. And if you knew you were going to get there, you might have enjoyed the journey more. But it was constantly frustrating that, I thought I was doing good work and qualified, and just couldn't get the opportunity. And I thought I was a good enough basketball announcer to be at the NBA level, but I couldn't get a sniff. I could not get a sniff as far as getting a professional basketball job, which made it weird that when I switched to baseball, it happened so quickly. I don't know why that is. Maybe I was, in the end, I was much better, destined to be in baseball as opposed to basketball, but or maybe it's just the breaks. I mean, who knows, if I didn't get the Nationals job, would I still be in AAA? I don't know. I mean, these jobs are so hard to get. So, I mean, it was constantly on my mind, and it probably, wore on me a lot that it didn't happen more quickly. But if you look at it with the benefit of hindsight, I mean, I was hired in 2006 by the Nationals, so I was 34 years old at the time. It seemed like it took me a long time to get there, but there are other guys who are a lot older than that who haven't gotten there. So in the end, 34 is, it was still pretty young to be able to get that opportunity at the big league level.
Did you ever have that thought while you were going through that process that, I'm not enjoying the talk show side of it, I'm just going to go to Billings and do a bowl and see if that route works for me?
No, I didn't, because just the stage of my life. I mean, I was married.
That's fair.
And
yeah.
I had a son in 2000 when I was in Charlotte. My daughter was born in 2004 when I was in Boston. So even, going to the AAA, it was a little bit of a pay cut when I joined Pawtucket. But I was able to supplement it with some TV work there and some freelance work. So, fortunately, my wife has a really good job, and she was the stable one. She had the stable income so that, if I took a step back, it didn't cripple the family. But I was not in the position personally to be able to make that big of a leap. Whereas someone who, is just coming up, if you're 24, 25 and you're unattached, then yeah, maybe you can make that jump down to the single A and climb that ladder. But it was a little bit of a jump for me to go to triple A. But again, with the scenario I was in at the radio station, you knew that the end was coming fairly soon. It was just a matter of when. So it was a no-brainer to make that move at that point. And again, Pawtucket at that stage and the legacy is built, with me. And since I've left, that's been a pretty good place to be as far as getting to the next level with the major leagues. At that point, you had Gary Cohen and Don Orsillo, and then Dave Fleming and Andy Freed. Dave with the Giants and Andy with the Rays had gone to the big leagues in consecutive years. So when I was able to go in 2006, they had 3 consecutive years where an announcer went from Pawtucket to the major leagues. That is an amazing streak. And right now, it's or maybe 8, 7 or 8 of the 30 teams in Major League Baseball have an ex-Pawtucket announcer in their booth, either in radio or TV. It's crazy what a building block that has been, or just a path to the major leagues, a stepping stone, if you will.
You probably get this question a lot, and I know they take it very seriously. But why else do you think it is that it's such a breeding ground?
Well, my simple answer to that, and I am asked it a lot, is, it's the only place in the minor leagues I work full time, but I know from their perspective, they wanted to hire the best announcer. They wanted to hire an announcer they thought was a major league announcer. I think a lot of places in the minor leagues, they're hiring someone who can sell and make money, and the announcing is secondary. For them, announcing was first, and they wanted the big league sound. So the way they went through the process was interesting. They basically had everybody in the front office gather in a room, and they would play the different play-by-play samples of the hopefuls. And it was a vote. And the staff didn't get the final say, but it was almost like an NCAA tournament where you listen to 2 announcers. Well, which one do you like better? And it was survive in advance. So it was almost like a focus group of people who were baseball fans, and who do I like listening to?
Interesting.
And it's really, I had never heard of any other organization doing it that way before or since, but it worked because you had people who were around the game and in the game and used to hearing good announcing with the Red Sox. Well, what sounds good to you and to the group? And that's how they would winnow the field down to the finalists, and ultimately, they'd bring them in for interviews, and the team president and general manager would ultimately make the final hire. But as far as getting that group of finalists, it's like they had their own focus group.
That's got to be sort of validating in and of its own right, isn't it?
Well, they did. They chose well. If you look at the track record,
yeah.
that front office had a pretty good idea what they were looking for.
You mentioned the talk background, and I've read articles, too, where you've kind of equated it to baseball and being able to have that conversation on air. What is it particularly, though, about hosting a talk show that equates well to baseball more so than just being able to be a regular conversationalist, if that makes sense? What is it about the particular skill set of having to host a show that carries over to basically having to host a game, for lack of a better way to put it?
Well, I guess it was kind of the show that I did or had to do. The shows that I was on were never all that highly rated, and sometimes we didn't get a lot of phone calls. So how are you going to fill the time? You have to be able to ad lib, to converse, to tell the story, to think on your feet. So if you think of it's a talk show with 2 or 3 guys and they're yelling and screaming at each other, well, no, that to me is not a good training ground for baseball. That's not what I want from a play-by-play broadcast, but you have to be someone that people enjoy listening to. So to me, it just gave me the skill set to be able to fill time and fill it in an entertaining and informative fashion. So I remember there was several occasions where I had to host a show solo for 4 hours, and over the course of 4 hours, I might get 4 phone calls, and we get a guest here and there. Well, how are you going to fill the time? It was a pretty invaluable experience to me. That might not be the same for every talk show host, but for mine, it was a terrific experience. So I thought it was very valuable. Now, the act of actually calling play-by-play, well, you get better by doing games and feeling the rhythm of the game and knowing when to lay out. So many guys that I hear who send me stuff from the minor leagues, it's almost, and even if it's a solo broadcast, it's constant dialogue. There's never a moment to let the game breathe or take a breath. It's like dead air. And we're kind of taught this in radio, that dead air is evil. Well, in a 3-hour baseball game, especially if you're doing it solo in the minor leagues, or even in the major leagues, you don't have to fill all 3 hours front to back. So once you get up and get the chance to do games, it's about learning the pacing of the game, the rhythm of the game, and how to let the game breathe. I think that you can only learn by doing games, and the year in the minor leagues plus the time I had done in AAA down in Charlotte was helpful. So I think it was a good combination of all those skills.
That's probably part of the answer to my next question. But I know you and Charlie like to interact a lot, more so than just having a play-by-play guy while the other guy kind of bides his time till his innings. How do you guys, I don't know if orchestrate that is the right way to say it, but is there kind of like a co-prep in some way where you say, listen, like, all right, Charlie, let's go over what we've got tonight. Here's what I've got. Here's what you've got. We're on the same page. So it's not, I don't know, you're never surprised by something he wants to talk about. He's never surprised by something you want to talk about. And there's kind of a preset. These are, in I guess, kind of talk show fashion, like, hey, this is something that might come up tonight. Let's be ready to talk about it.
No, actually, absolutely the opposite. We don't talk about it at all. And occasionally we'll joke. One of our little fallback inside joke lines we always use is rehearsing your ad libs. We'll drop that, or we'll say like, well, that didn't go like rehearsal. Well, we never rehearse anything. There is no script. There's no hey, I want to talk about this, or you want to talk about that. I mean, it's just wherever the game takes us. And one thing about him, and one thing about what I do is, I mean, I would stack our preparation up against any broadcast crew. I mean, I put together a pretty significant file for the team that we're playing, and he does the same. So, we have our information, and as far as being up to date on what's going around the league, we're up to date on all that. So you've got that to call on, plus time around the clubhouse, visiting with the players. You're accumulating talking points and storylines throughout the course of the day. It's just a matter of sometimes what you accumulate might not be relevant to what's going on in the game. So there's that feel that, hey, I have all this information, but do you just give the information for the sake of it? No. If there's something that you have that's relevant to what's going on in the game, that's when you want to utilize that particular thing. And as far as the back and forth, I think that's just kind of our shared philosophy, and it's not the philosophy of everyone. And certainly guys, and back in the day, it was kind of you do your innings, and then the color guy doesn't do anything, and then you switch off and he does his innings. Well, I guess we're kind of from a different approach, and we both agree that that's kind of the way we feel is the best way to do a game, that there is that by-play and interaction and conversational nature. And as many big plays as you can call or whatever, when we hear from fans, no one ever comes up and says, man, your call on the double last night was perfect. You had the outfielder placement. You had the carom plate off the wall. You called the position. Boy, you just called that double perfectly. No one ever says that to you. The thing they come up to you and talk to you about, hey, you remember that time you were talking about where you went out to eat, or some off the cuff story, and we get a back and forth. Those are the things that people remember and want to talk to you about and latch on to. So yeah, I mean, you can't, it's harder to do that if you're just talking by yourself. So those are I think that's kind of why the fans here in Washington have appreciated us, is because of the chemistry that we have. And that creates, just on its own, some funny moments. And, if you're a fan, well, maybe you're more Charlie's age, you relate to him, or maybe you're a fan who's my age, you relate to, someone in the booth might share your perspective, and then we come from two different perspectives, and it makes for interesting radio.
This is going to be an extreme example, but what's the right way to go from, here's David or here's Daniel Murphy, the 2-2 who's in the dirt, 3-2 to hey Charlie, here's where we had dinner last night. What's the right way to dive into stories that are sometimes a little bit non sequitur or sometimes loosely tied in, but are still entertaining to the overall product without being just like, bam, I just hit you over the head with this, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, no, it makes total sense, and to me, it's about the game, the pace of the game, the score of the game. If you're in a 1-0 pitcher's duel, and it's a big game, and the game carries itself. I mean, a lot of the people will come up and, like I said, they'll say to us, "Man, you guys crack me up. You're funny, blah blah blah." Well, there's certain games you might listen to for 2.5 hours, and we don't say a whole lot that's funny because we're calling the game, and
Sure.
and that's what the game dictates. But some of these games are longer, drawn out. Some games are going to be 9-1. Well, that's when you earn your money. Why is someone going to listen to your broadcast when it's 9-1 and the outcome of this game is decided in the third inning? That's, to me, when you can kind of experiment and have a little fun and challenge yourself. Now, admittedly, the first 6 years I was with the Nationals, the team did not have a winning season, so we had a lot of those games, especially the first 4 years when twice they lost 100 games. So that's when we did a lot of that. As the Nationals the last 5 years and now 6 have been either a first place team or contending, we've probably shied away from that more. So yeah, if you're in a 2-1 game and there's a big spot, you're not going to be clowning around or talking about stuff that's off the cuff. Now you can weave in a story relative to a player, his history, his background story over the course of a close game. I mean, and there are a lot of guys in the major leagues who have very interesting backgrounds and stories, and Vin Scully was obviously the master of that, and no one can top what he did. But if you have a relief pitcher coming in and he's overcome 2 Tommy John surgeries and incredible odds to get to this point, you can work that in over the course of an inning in between pitches. Baseball allows you to do that. But as far as just kind of, trying to turn it into the comedy hour when it's a 3-2 game, that's not the time to do it.
Is there a right way to do the relief pitcher has 2 Tommy John surgeries, or is it legitimately just Frank had 2 Tommy John surgeries and you go into it?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, you kind of weave it. You kind of weave it into the flow of the broadcast, and being careful on radio never to miss the action. I mean, the Nationals just traded for Brandon Kinsler. I mean, his story is amazingly interesting. He was a 40th round pick, and then he was released. He was in independent ball for 3 years. He was selling season tickets in the off season for his independent team. You can weave that in between the 1-0 pitch and the 1-1 pitch if you're really good at it, and if it's a long at bat, you can get a lot in. So yeah, I mean, you just kind of take it into the flow of the conversation and go with it, and then if the ball's put in play and you've got to describe a base hit or a line drive or a double play or whatever, well, then you get back to it when the pace slows back down. It's just it's kind of what we do.
Will you drop a story too? If you're talking about Brandon Kinsler, all of a sudden he gives up a jack, there's 2 more base hits. Sometimes it's easier to just, all right, we'll come back to that at another time and not make it a convoluted type of inning. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh sure. And that's why you always have to be really careful. It's never a good thing to start something that you might know will take a little bit of time with 2 outs, because you never know.
True.
You never know when you're going to, when that last pitch is going to come, and you got to go to the commercial break. And there are times that it happens. Sometimes you start something 1 out, and the guy hits into a double play. And yeah, I try not to let something kind of dangle out there unfinished. Now you may have to give the abridged ending, but you at least want to get to the finish line. It's just sometimes that happens, but ideally you weave it into the flow of the inning, and you get where you want to go.
How'd you like your foray into television this year? I guess game aside, because that the one hitter was a neat aside to it. But what was fun and what was different about it?
Well, it's definitely, it was a challenge, just because I've done so much more radio than television. And so to me, it's a constant battle. I'm so used to, on radio, setting up the pitch and describing the pitch. So it was a constant battle for me of what not to say. And that's not a comfortable feeling for me. So I can't say that I enjoyed that aspect of it. But, I mean, there's certain aspects that once the ball's put in play, and you can, you call it, and you don't have to be quite as descriptive, but you can still build the excitement of, a fly ball in the air that could potentially be a home run. I mean, you're sitting there watching, describing it like you would on radio, waiting to see if it would go over the wall, as the fans are watching with you to see if it will go over the wall. So, I mean, I thought there were some exciting calls. I don't, I've often asked myself, would I want to do it full time on television? I don't know that I would, but again, I don't, no one's ever offered it to me. I don't know if it would in the future, but it would certainly be something that would be really hard to leave radio, just because that's what I've done. It's what I love to do. So, while did I enjoy aspects of it? Yes. Did I love it to the point that I'm dying to do it again tomorrow? No, not really. I mean, to me, radio is what I do, and it was very comfortable to be back in the radio chair when the TV stint was done.
Did you get used to that feeling? Because it's funny you say that, because most of what I do is in radio. When I go to television, the first time as I did it, and it still exists now a little bit, there's that naked feeling of, I know I'm supposed to talk here on radio, but I know I'm not supposed to talk here now. Oh my gosh, what do I do?
Yeah, totally.
Did that go away? How long did that take to go away?
It took a couple games, and I can't say that it was totally not there on the last day too. I mean, I think I got into a nice rhythm. I ended up doing 6 games. Games 5 and 6 were easier than game 1 and 2. Working with FP Santangelo, I mean, he was very welcoming and good to work with. So that was an easy transition. I think you try on television to bring in the analyst more. Whereas when I'm working with Charlie on the radio, I don't generally set him up with a question. I mean, if I say something and then I'm done, he'll know where I'm going. He can pick it right up. It's just, we've worked together that long. To me, on television, radio, it's a play-by-play announcer's medium, and television is an analyst medium. You've got to set up the analyst. So there are times where, you're going to dictate the conversation, pose a question. He played in the major leagues. What is this hitter thinking here in this spot? Well, I certainly have my opinion, having watched thousands of games, but he played the game. So let me bring out his opinion. I ended up doing a lot more of that on the television side than I would on the radio side. So, like I said, I think game 5 and 6, it was fine, but still, if you're not careful, if you're used to it, you can slide back into radio play-by-play really easily.
I would be remiss if I did not mention your time at Syracuse and WAER. We actually had Caridi on the podcast last week, and we talked about guys that he crossed over with when he was in college, and he was telling stories of being roommates with McDonough, and what it's like when you're at WAER and you're with those groups of guys, and now you kind of look at it and it's like, oh, well, if you only knew then. Who were you in school with, and kind of who did you overlap with, and what was it like in the early 90s at AER?
Well, my freshman year was fall of '89. I actually I joined AER a semester late. The first semester freshman year, I was at WJPZ, and so that got me on the air very quickly. It's much easier to get on the air more quickly at JPZ. I didn't really know about AER right away, but then kind of through word of mouth heard, well, this is the station where you can do the basketball and the football. So I was a semester behind everybody. So I joined second semester freshman year as basically, I think you were called a writer, which means you wrote your sportscast and you did it, but it didn't go on the air and it was critiqued by the upperclassmen. Well, the guy who critiqued my tapes back when I was a freshman was Ian Eagle. So that was a pretty good training ground. And the one thing, and I've crossed paths with Ian, several times over the years. I'll never forget this when I think it was Ian's first year with the New Jersey Nets. They came into Charlotte. And I was working down in Charlotte, and I got in touch with him and met him for lunch. And I asked him, I said, well, what's the key to the journey? Kind of what you asked me the first question. Yeah. And his answer was that he goes, there's no right answer. It's not like you'd go, and I think at the time I was doing Davidson. He goes, it's not like you do Davidson for 3 years, and then you go do Wake Forest for 4 years, and then you're ready for the NBA, and you go to the NBA. I mean, there's no roadmap, and that's kind of, I mean, that's proved to be true. I mean, my roadmap was all over the place, going from basketball and then kind of jumping late into baseball. So Ian was kind of the big star when I was there as a senior. As far as my classmates at AER, I mean, I did a whole lot of football games with Eric Cohen, and Eric is still up there. Yeah. We share the same birth date. Okay. October 16, 1971. We were born on the exact same day, and we spent our 21st birthday together in Morgantown, West Virginia, the night before an SU West Virginia football game. So that was an interesting one. As far as the most notable guy that I did games with, that would probably be Dave Pash. Pash was a year younger than me, and so we did a lot of basketball and football together, as he was a sophomore and I was a junior, and then I was a senior and he was a junior. So those were kind of the notable guys of my vintage.
What was 1989 Ian Eagle like?
Not that different from now. I mean, he just oozed talent. He was so smooth on the air. You knew that this guy was going to go places. There was no doubt about it.
Last question, Dave, and I'll let you go on this note because I know I got to let you get to the ballpark. But did you use a Bob Carpenter scorebook before you worked for the Nationals? Or is that come with the territory now that you're in Washington?
In fact, I did use a Bob Carpenter scorebook for my 2005 season in Pawtucket. But the small world, when I was doing games at North Carolina Charlotte, they were in Conference USA, and Bob was ESPN's primary Conference USA announcer. Okay. So I used to see Bob probably 2 or 3 times a year. He would do a Charlotte 49ers game either in Charlotte or on the road. So, I mean, I got to know Bob, I wouldn't say well, but we would certainly, whenever he'd come to do a Charlotte game, we would talk about the team and I'd give him my perspective. And so we got to know each other, fairly well over the years. So it was good to get reacquainted with him in 2006. And he is my golfing buddy on the road. And the good thing is, working for the Nationals, he has donated a Bob Carpenter scorebook every year that I've worked for the Nationals to the cause. I've tried to pay him, but a thank you is all he'll accept, and I certainly appreciate that because it's a great tool.
You just pick up a round of golf or 2, and then or 3, and then you're square.
Oh no, we're competitive. We're not. We gotta.
Fair enough. Dave, if people wanted to find you on Twitter or say hello on social media or something, I know a lot of good Nationals nuggets if they follow you. Where do they find you?
Yeah, it's just my name. It's at Dave Jageler, DaveJageler. I pretty much only tweet about Nationals and baseball, basically Nationals. Before every game, I try to find 5 or 6 nuggets that I'll shoot out. And I'll tweet about those nights starting pitchers, and Nationals fans seem to appreciate the knowledge. So I had to dig a little bit. The Nationals' last game, there was a walk-off grand slam for Howie Kendrick. And one thing that I'm pretty good at is I've got a real good memory for notable things that have happened now in my 12 years with the team. I missed the 05 season. I've done every year with the Nationals except for the first year in 05. And so when Kendrick hit the grand slam, I knew right away that there had been 3 other walk-off Grand Slams in Nationals history. And 2 of them are by Ryan Zimmerman, who still plays for the team, and the other is by a guy named Justin Maxwell. And I had seen Justin Maxwell 48 hours before the walk-off Grand Slam by Howie Kendrick. He'd been down on the warning track because he lives here in the area. He played for the Giants and the Nationals. So it's like Justin Maxwell was at the top of my mind. And as soon as Howie Kendrick hit that home run, my first thought was Justin Maxwell. So I'll have some Twitter nuggets about walk-off Grand Slams as far as the game before we're talking.
That is Dave Jageler of the Washington Nationals joining us here on PXPcast. We're in the same club, by the way, he and I. Neither of us were at W8ER our first semester at Syracuse. We both went to WJPZ, Z89. It's one of the other student radio stations. Does women's basketball, women's lacrosse, high school football. I didn't make the cut at W8ER my freshman year. I got cut before I ever walked in the door. So I went to Z89 and then came back my second semester and went from there, and everything worked out okay. But it's the not at W8ER your first semester club. I have found another member. Dave Jageler was in it back in the 90s. I joined him in the mid-2000s. Quick random aside as far as that is concerned. Going to totally switch things up on you. Next week, Alan Bestwick will be our guest, formerly of ESPN and NBC and Motor Racing Network, guy who goes back a long time and is very synonymous with auto racing, both NASCAR and IRL. Most recently, he did the most recent Indianapolis 500 on ABC, and was also one of the guys that was part of the massive layoffs at ESPN back in April as well. And Alan does talk to us about what that was like for him at the beginning of April and what is next for Alan Bestwick as well. We'll talk about a lot of motor racing, a lot of prep of motor racing, how you actually do motor racing, what it's like working with a team, the size that you have to have in terms of a racing television broadcast as well. We touch on a lot of different things with Alan Bestwick. I'm very much looking forward to you guys hearing that conversation coming up next week. Many thanks as always to Dave Jageler. Many thanks to you guys for joining us. If you haven't yet, do please hit subscribe. You'll get this podcast downloaded to your phone automatically every week when it drops on Friday if you do that. And if you enjoy the podcast, please do take the second to just hit the stars. It takes you a second. However many stars you think we're worth, throw a rating our way. A rating or review goes a long way to both help our rankings and the algorithms for iTunes, but it also helps us get advertisers and help keep this podcast going and all of that good entrepreneurial stuff, I guess, factors in there as well. That being said, we'll talk to you with Alan Bestwick next Friday morning. This is PXPcast. My name is Joel Gadet, and we are out. Hit it, Marshmallow.